I'll never shake the memory of that morning. It's stitched so tightly into my mind it might as well be carved in bark. The sky was barely awake, the faintest brush of gold spilling over the rooftops, when the peace was shredded, ripped apart by a harsh, jagged roar of metal. It wasn't the usual hum of traffic or the lazy clatter of a garbage truck. No, this sound was something alien and violent, a growl that didn't belong in the quiet rhythm of my neighborhood. For half a breath, I figured it had to be some construction crew starting too early down the street, maybe tearing up an unlucky driveway. But my gut told me different. The noise wasn't drifting from afar. It was thrumming uncomfortably close. In fact, it was coming from my own backyard. Slippers half on, heart pounding like it already knew trouble before my head caught up, I shoved open the door and raced into the morning. And there she was. Ah, Melanie Payne. If villains had local editions printed on glossy flyers, her face would be the cover of mine. Standing in my yard with her clipboard like a crown, puffed full of self-importance, the self-declared ruler of our homeowners association looked on as two men sank whining chainsaws into my century-old oak. To call what I felt a shock would be too thin. It was like watching someone step on your chest. That tree wasn't just lumber. It wasn't landscape debris. It was the very heart of the yard, a green monument that had stood taller and truer than the entire reign of Melanie's petty empire. Its roots had been here before her laminated bylaws were printed, deeper than even her imagination could measure, I shouted. Of course I shouted. Anyone would, anyone with blood or memory inside them. I demanded she stop, to shut it down immediately. Melanie, though, didn't flinch. Her lips curled into the kind of smirk that thrives on rules nobody else sees, the kind that feels rehearsed in bathroom mirrors. She casually lifted that clipboard, her mighty wand of pretend authority, and declared like some budget goddess, Bylaw 47.8, unsafe vegetation must be removed. Her voice so full of theater it almost made me laugh. Almost. Because here's the hitch. No such bylaw exists. Not in paper, not in ink, not anywhere but the stage play inside her head. That was the moment I understood in full. This wasn't about safety. It was never about safety. This was about power, about control. And Melanie, in her titanium confidence and plastic badge, had just declared war on the wrong man. Before I carry you deeper into the storm, let me pull you in closer. Where are you right now as you hear this? Where are you watching from? What time ticks on your clock? Drop it down in the comments so I know which corners of the world are gathered here under this story. Because trust me, it only gets sharper from here. That oak wasn't something you casually passed, the way you'd glance at a light pole or mailbox on your way to the curb. It was the kind of tree that slowed your pace, that tilted your head skyward and forced you to remember that you and your worries are smaller than time itself. My grandfather had planted it back when this land was a patchwork of dirt paths and wide-open pastures, long before the HOA stormed in with lists of beige paint shades and clipboards sharpened like weapons. As a child, my calendar wasn't marked in days or months. It was measured instead in the rings of cooling shade under those branches. As a grown man, I grilled beneath it. I strung lanterns for birthday parties. I built a swing for my niece with hands blistered but proud. If a yard could have a heartbeat, that oak thumped as mine. But Melanie Payne didn't see memory. Melanie saw only obstacles, things that dared blemish her imaginary brochure-perfect community. So there I stood, physically between her smirking face and the oak's wide trunk, while her two hired workers hesitated mid-cut. The chainsaws sputtered and snarled, angry insects hooked onto gasoline. My voice cut sharper than theirs. "Kill the engine!" They froze. One of them, Cap, turned back with sweat spilling already, eyes silently broadcasting relief. He killed the engine instantly, as though he'd been waiting for permission. The other hesitated, looking to Melanie as if weighing his paycheck against his conscience. She, of course, planted her feet like this was theater rehearsals for overconfident tyrants 101. Clipboard rising like a mock scepter, she quoted again as if it were divine scripture. Bylaw 47.8. Unsafe vegetation must be removed immediately. This is emergency action, authorized by the HOA presidency. She stressed each syllable like she expected thunder to roll after. And me? I laughed. Couldn't help it. Her words were so bloated with importance they collapsed under their own weight. You can't even authorize a lemonade stand without board approval, I shot back. There is no Bylaw 47 anything. And even if there were, not a single line would give you the right to trespass on private property and butcher a healthy tree. Her smile was sharp, but it stopped at the teeth, never climbing into her eyes. "Mr. Boyd, the common welfare," she began. I cut in, sharp as an axe. "Doesn't trump the law. And certainly not my deed." One chainsaw coughed dead. The other wheezed another second. Then its operator dropped his eyes and killed it too. The pause was thick, broken only by nature itself. Birds, you could hear them now. 2 doves fluttered down stubbornly to the gutter's edge, resuming their endless quarrel as if they, too, had opinions about Melanie Payne. Fine. Her tone could have sliced paper. If you wish to formalize this, we can formalize it. Expect a notice of violation today. She tapped her pen against the oak's bark like her little gesture could erase a century of life. Canker rot, insect blight, bark fissures, classic hazard indicators. Classic, I shot back. Classic misreading of what you don't understand. The arborist reports on my fridge. Healthy crown, perfect structure. Seasonal shedding only, well within limits. My voice steady, my patience stretched thin. But sure, let's formalize. Right now. Phone out, camera on, recording light blinking red. I turned the stage lights back on her bluff. For documentation, I said steady. Please state your name, your title, and the exact bylaw you believe authorizes this. Her jaw twitched. Power didn't like being filmed. She straightened, badge hanging like a wannabe sheriff's star, and fumbled in her memory purse for fake numbers. Bylaw 47.8 subsection B. Imminent hazards. Great, I replied with sugar-dipped sarcasm. And the text of that bylaw lives where exactly? Show me. She snapped the kind of brittle claws people use when cornered. The same rules packet you chronically ignore. The one about maximum mailbox height? About acceptable tones of beige? I stepped closer, pointed. We'll do this the simple way. I'll be contacting the board and the police. If you and your workers are still trespassing when they arrive, maybe you can share your beige philosophy with them. Her nostrils flared. Melanie hated contradiction, especially in front of people she thought of as her underlings. Her face clamped down, then snapped toward the workers. Pack up. We'll return with proper documentation. In HOA tongue, that phrase usually translates to stuff I'll invent later. But it also meant one thing. For now, I had a window. We walked them out, the gates shutting with a hard iron slide between me and her theater troupe. She lingered on the sidewalk, poised like a storm cloud that couldn't decide which house to drench. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she warned. That line usually comes before a mistake, I replied coolly. Don't make it, she pivoted sharply, heels chewing the concrete, phone already to her ear. No doubt calling the faithful 2 board members who still thought her bark had bite. She'd flood them with confident nonsense faster than they could ask for evidence. But the daylight had turned. The bluff had cracked. Inside, the kitchen smelled faintly of coffee leftovers and lemon oil. I steadied myself once more by staring at the arborist's report pinned to the fridge. Quercus alba. Healthy. Age estimated 102. Replacement value astronomical. My hand smoothed over the stack of paperwork I kept for these very storms. Deeds, titles, surveys, city forestry permits like armor and manila folders. I hadn't picked this fight, but if she wanted it official, I could make it official. I dialed Thomas, my friend whose very voice sounded like it wore a tailored suit. He listened in silence as I relayed every detail, from the chainsaw's first shriek to Melanie's fabricated scripture. Not a single interruption, just clicks of notes, his steady stenographic calm. Finally he spoke. Send me the video. And the arborist report. You did right documenting. 2 points. 1, trespass is trespass. 2, if she continues, you're no longer in HOA slapfight territory. You're in felony property damage. Together we shaped strategy in neat lines, like sharpening pencils. By afternoon, I'd drafted a cold, precise email to the board. Subject line, unauthorized tree removal attempt, immediate attention required. Bulleted facts, timestamps, names, that fake citation recorded word for word. Attached video, arborist report, snapshots of bark, canopy, and the swing I'd unhooked minutes earlier with trembling hands. And while my email arrow shot forward, the neighborhood group chat lit up in sparks. Someone had caught her entrance in crisp video, Melanie marching like some chainsaw concierge across my lawn. Comments rolled in, half jokes, half shocked outbursts. But beneath them pulsed the messages of substance. She tried to cite us for a bird feeder. We've had issues too. Happy to testify. That afternoon I armed up, new security cameras, bold red, no trespassing signs. The hardware clerk raised a brow, arms like knots of rope. Raccoons? He asked. 2-legged ones, I answered. He nodded. The ancient village reply, say no more. 4 cameras later, I had my fortress. 1 lens fixed right on the oak, half security, half devotion, so I could capture not just danger, but its silent strength if I ever needed reminding. By evening, the board's reply arrived. Penned by weary chair James Holloway, a man too used to HOA wars. His words solid as stone. There is no bylaw 47.8. No authorization has been given. Any notices claiming otherwise are false. We will address this directly. I printed that letter immediately, the paper's weight sturdier than screens. Taped it on my back door like a talisman. Outside, the oak swayed in backlit glory, shadows thrown across the grass like cathedral walls. It looked utterly unbothered, and I envied it deeply. As twilight folded in, somewhere a grill flared up. Voices cheered at a game, and I sat beneath that tree with a notepad, scribbling dates, calls, steps to come. Melanie Payne believed urgency could be faked, but I knew patience could be sharpened into a blade. She had brought a chainsaw to a paperwork battle, and I knew without doubt whose odds were better. And still, lingering in the warm, brewing air, I could feel it, the promise of escalation, waiting just ahead. Heavy as humidity. Bullies don't retreat, they regroup. She would come back louder, meaner, convinced that repetition turns lies into law. Good. I wanted her to. Cameras were ready. So was I. By the next morning, the oak looked the same. Solid, unmoved, a sentinel in the yard. But I didn't. Sleep had been a suggestion, no tan achievement. Every creak outside had felt like the return of Melanie Payne with her phantom bylaws and her chainsaw mercenaries. By sunrise, I had brewed enough coffee to fuel a small army and decided it was time to stop reacting and start fortifying. My first call was to the non-emergency line of the Brookstone Police. I'd like to report an attempted property destruction and trespass, I said. The dispatcher's tone shifted from routine to alert when I mentioned a chainsaw. Within the hour, a patrol car pulled up, red and blue lights, politely quiet. Officer Rodriguez, a broad-shouldered man with a mustache so perfect it looked painted on, stepped out first. Officer Chen, younger, sharp-eyed, followed, notebook ready. They walked the perimeter with me, inspecting where Melanie's hired cutters had nicked into the oak's bark. It wasn't deep, more of a scar than a wound, but the insult was worse than the injury. "You've got her on video?" Rodriguez asked. "Multiple angles?" I said, handing over a thumb drive. She even announced the fake bylaw for the camera. Subsection B, apparently of her imagination. Chen smirked despite herself. Creative. I explained how Melanie had invoked her self-manufactured authority, how she'd cited non-existent rules, and how she'd promised formal notices. "She's escalating," I added, "and I'm not waiting for her to take the trunk all the way through before something is done." Rodriguez leaned a hand on the oak. "This tree is older than any of us. Looks strong to me. You've got enough documentation here to press charges if she tries again. My advice, keep those cameras rolling. Call us the second you see her set foot past your fence. We'll have it on record." They left with a copy of the footage and promised a patrol swing by during the week. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt like the law wasn't just a phrase Mellon tossed around. It was something heavier, something that could land on her shoulders if she pushed further. "Next, call Thomas Green, my lawyer and longtime friend." When he answered, his voice carried the calm of a man whose weapon of choice was paperwork. "I've reviewed the board's email you forwarded. That alone dismantles her claim, but we need more." "What kind of more expert testimony?" "An arborist. Someone who can quantify what she almost destroyed. If this escalates to court, judges love numbers, value age condition, and we'll need to establish that the oak is not a hazard, that her justification is baseless." "Already ahead of you," I said. "I've got a report on file. Certified arborist says the tree's healthy. Replacement value around 40 grand. Thomas whistled low. 40,000 Ethan. If she'd succeeded, that's felony territory. Criminal mischief. Property destruction easily. With video evidence, she'd be boxed in like a raccoon in a dumpster. I pictured Melanie in a courtroom wagging her clipboard at a judge who couldn't care less about her bylaws. The thought warmed me more than the coffee. By midday, the arborist himself, Dr. Leonard Marks, came to re-inspect. He circled the oak with a reverence usually reserved for art. "Quercus alba," he murmured, tracing the grooves of the bark. "White oak, healthy crown, strong branching, minimal pest presence. This tree could stand another century if cared for properly." He crouched, brushing away soil at the base. Some superficial scarring from her attempt, but nothing fatal. If she'd gone deeper, he shook his head. "Well, you'd be mourning a part of your family history?" "Tell me about it," I said. "You can give me a statement." "Absolutely," he said, tucking a tape measure back into his kit. "I'll update your report, note the value, and add the risk analysis. If Shettries again, there's no wiggle room." I signed his invoice with satisfaction. Every page was another nail in Melanie's coffin of credibility. Sure enough, by late afternoon, a notice appeared in my mailbox. Not from the city, not from the official HOA board, but from Melanie herself, printed on HOA letterhead. She must have pirated from a template the letter, accused me of endangering community welfare by failing to remove the oak, and threatened a daily fine of $250 until compliance. At the bottom, her signature, Melanie Payne Ho, President. I scanned it, laughed, and sent it straight to Thomas and the board. Within an hour, James Holloway, the real chairman, replied to all. "This is not an authorized communication. Please disregard any notices issued by Miss Payne outside official HOA channels." It was the legal equivalent of pulling the rug out from under her. And I almost wished I'd been there to see her face when she realized her little scheme had been exposed in writing. Still, I knew Melanie. She didn't back down. She doubled down. A woman like her believed repetition could make fiction into fact. She would claim, insist, demand until someone too tired to argue simply gave in. But I wasn't tired. I was caffeinated, camera ready, and braced for the next swing. That evening, as the oak stretched shadows across the yard, I sat beneath it with my laptop and drafted a personal log. Time-stamped entries, scanned letters, copied emails, screenshots of texts from neighbors who had filmed her trespass. I imagined one day laying it all out on a courtroom projector. The saga of a tree versus a tyrant. Halfway through typing, my phone buzzed with a message from Thomas. "Remember, Ethan, HOA power is not absolute. They can fine for paint colors and lawn length, not chainsaw diplomacy." She crossed the property line. That's where HOA ends, and the law begins. I leaned back, staring up through the lattice of branches, the leaves whispering like gossip overhead. Maybe Melanie thought she was running this neighborhood, but she'd just been handed a lesson. The law didn't wear a clipboard. It wore a badge, carried a gavel, and held receipts in neat manila folders. And I had plenty of those. If you've never received an HOA violation notice before, let me describe the sensation. It's like finding a parking ticket on your windshield when you know darn well you fed the meter. It's not fear so much as irritation. A paper mosquito bite that makes you itch in places you didn't know could itch. 2 days after the chainsaw incident, I opened my mailbox and found a neat little envelope with the HOA logo in the corner. Inside, a notice of violation addressed to me citing, you guessed it, Bylaw 47.8, 8 unsafe vegetation hazard. According to the document, my oak tree represented an imminent threat to the safety of Brookstone Meadows. The letter demanded that I remove it within 7 days or incur a $250 daily fine until compliance was achieved. I laughed so hard the mailman probably thought I'd lost my mind. The oak was standing tall in my yard, birds fluttering in its branches, squirrels chasing each other in manic spirals. And here was Melanie Payne trying to convince the world it was a ticking time bomb. The kicker was the signature line. Melanie Payne, HOA President. She'd even stamped it with a knockoff seal. If I didn't know better, I'd have thought she raided the arts and crafts aisle at Office Depot. I marched back inside, scanned the document, and sent it to the HOA board with the subject line, "Creative writing assignment turned in late." Within minutes, I got a reply from James Holloway, the real HOA chairman. "Mr. Boyd, this is not an authorized communication. The board has not issued any such violation, and there is no bylaw 47.8. Please disregard Miss Payne's notice. Forward any further correspondence of this nature to us immediately." James Holloway, HOA chairman. That was polite. HOA speak for Melanie is making stuff up again. Still, I wanted something more official. So, I picked up the phone and called James directly. He answered with the exhausted tone of a man who's been dealing with Melanie for far too long. "Ethan, I knew this was coming," he sighed. "She's been overstepping for months. Tried to tell one neighbor their fence had to be painted approved beige. Demanded another remove a basketball hoop because it attracted delinquents. She's not president. She's not even on the executive board. She's chair of the landscaping committee. Her actual responsibilities are limited to seasonal flower suggestions." I let that sink in. So, she's basically the volunteer in charge of picking tulips, and she thinks that makes her judge, jury, and chainsaw executioner. Exactly. James said, "And frankly, the board's had enough. You sending us this evidence, this fake violation helps us deal with her. We'll be calling a meeting." I could practically hear his pen scratching across paper. Melanie had just handed me Exhibit A in her downfall. That night, the neighborhood group chat lit up again. Screenshots of my violation notice had spread faster than gossip at a church potluck. Neighbors chimed in. "She fined us last month for leaving our trash bins out too long. She told my kids their sidewalk chalk violated HOA guidelines. She tried to stop us from planting roses, said only hydrangeas were permitted." The chorus was clear. Melanie had been running a one-woman crusade of nonsense for years, and people were tired of it. But here's the thing about power bullies. Don't surrender it willingly. The next day, 3 more envelopes appeared in my mailbox. Each one identical $250 fines stacking like Monopoly money. By her math, I now owed the HOA $750, even though the HOA itself had said the notices were fake. I took them inside, lined them up on the kitchen counter like trophies, and recorded a video. "Day 3 of Melanie's Fantasy HOA," I said, holding up the letters. She's now fined me $750 for the crime of owning a tree. Next week, maybe she'll fine me for breathing without a permit. The video wasn't for laughs. It was for evidence. Still, my niece later told me I should post it online because it was funny in a depressing adult way. Later that afternoon, I noticed Melanie patrolling the sidewalk outside my fence, clipboard and handphone pressed to her ear, pacing like a general surveying enemy territory. When she spotted my security camera pointed right at her, she gave a tight smile and a wave that said, "I know you're watching, but I don't care." I waved back all teeth. That evening, James called me again. We had an emergency board meeting. We're stripping Melanie of her landscaping committee role. She's not to send any further correspondence under HOA letterhead. And if she does, it'll be grounds for legal action. Good, I said. But do you really think she'll stop? James hesitated. Honestly, no. But now you've got it in writing from the board. If she pushes further, it's on her. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window at the oak, silhouetted in the evening light. Strong, steady, unshaken. Meanwhile, Melanie was unraveling, trying to build a throne out of paperwork that didn't exist. The irony was delicious. The more fake fines she sent, the more she proved my case. The oak didn't need defending. Melanie was building the evidence against herself, one bogus notice at a time. What she didn't know, and what made me smile into my coffee, was that the police, my lawyer, and the real HOA board were all now in the loop. Every envelope she dropped in my mailbox was just another brick in the wall closing in around her. But I also knew something else. People like Melanie don't slow down when they hit a wall. They try to climb it, claw through it, or set it on fire. And sure enough, the storm that was brewing wouldn't come from the sky alone because Melanie Payne was about to escalate. And this time, karma would be holding the chainsaw. The police didn't waste time. 2 days after the fake fines appeared in my mailbox, I heard a knock on my door that carried authority. When I opened it, Officers Rodriguez and Chen stood there again, hats tipped back, expressions somewhere between weary and stern. Behind them was a marked cruiser, lights off, presence unmistakable. "Morning, mister." Boyd Rodriguez said, "We're here on follow-up. We've spoken with the board and reviewed your evidence. Just so you know, Miss Payne's actions are under official warning status now. If she sets foot on your property again without your permission, we will arrest her for trespassing." "No gray area left?" Chen added, flipping open her notebook. "We also want you to understand those notices she sent you completely invalid," the board confirmed. "Keep every copy, though. Paper trail like this is gold if it goes to court." I invited them into the yard. The oak stood proudly in the middle, dappled light streaming through its branches. I watched both officers glance up at it, as if they too felt its weight and worth. "She's fixated on this tree," I said. "Why?" "Because it blocks her view. Because she doesn't like squirrels. Because she wants to prove she's more powerful than the deed to my property." Rodriguez shrugged. "Control. Some people don't feel alive unless they're running somebody else's life. But she's been warned. Next time it's cuffs." I nodded, thankful, though deep down I knew Melanie wouldn't take the hint. If bullies could read caution signs, they wouldn't be bullies. After they left, I headed to the hardware store again. This time I wasn't just thinking cameras. I was thinking perimeter. Motion lights, reinforced locks. The kind of signage that makes even delivery drivers think twice about stepping off the walkway. I bought enough no trespassing and 24-hour surveillance signs to decorate my yard like a crime drama set. Back home, I set up the new system. Each camera connected to cloud storage. Each motion light rigged to blaze at the slightest raccoon shuffle. My phone pinged with alerts every time a leaf fluttered, which was annoying but satisfying. At least I knew the oak wasn't alone anymore. It had digital guardians. The first night the system was live, I sat on the porch with a cold beer, watching the camera cycle on my tablet. The oak loomed in the center frame, proud as ever, with its branches whispering in the dusk breeze. For the first time in weeks, I felt prepared. If Melanie came sneaking again, I'd have it in living color angles, sharp enough to make a courtroom jury lean forward in disbelief. But preparation doesn't mean relaxation. Every rustle in the bushes, every car door slamming down the block set my nerves buzzing. I imagined her silhouette at the fence-line clipboard clutched like a dagger, muttering her fake bylaws under her breath. And sure enough, the very next morning my system paid off. At 6:12 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I checked the feed and there she was, Melanie Payne, strutting down the sidewalk in her usual pressed slacks and pastel blouse, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. She didn't step onto my property this time, but she paced back and forth outside the fence, craning her neck to glare at the oak as though she could chop it down with her stare. She spotted the camera lens, pointed squarely at her, and smiled a thin plastic curve of lips that screamed defiance. Then she lifted her phone, snapped a picture of my yard, and scribbled something furiously on her clipboard. After a few minutes of theatrical note-taking, she strutted off heels, clicking like punctuation marks. I replayed the footage 3 times, shaking my head. It was almost comical. Almost. Except comedy doesn't usually come with the threat of chainsaws and lawsuits. Later that day, an email arrived from the HOA board. Mr. Forboyd. It read, "Please be aware that Miss Payne has been formally stripped of all committee responsibilities. Any correspondence you receive from her claiming HOA authority is fraudulent. Should she attempt to find cite or penalize you again, please forward it directly to the board." The message ended with a final line that made me smile. "We regret her behavior has caused disruption. Steps are being taken to prevent recurrence." Translation: Melanie Payne had just been publicly declawed, but in my gut I knew better. She wasn't going to lick her wounds quietly. No, she'd be back louder, meaner and dumber because that's how people like her operate. That evening, I sat beneath the oak again. The branches swayed the air, smelled of earth and history, and I thought about how this tree had stood through a century of storms, wars, and winters. If Melanie thought she could intimidate Ida or me, she was out of her depth. Still, as twilight settled and the neighborhood lights blinked on one by one, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real storm hadn't hit yet. The cameras, the warnings, the emails, they were just sandbags stacked against a rising tide. And if history had taught me anything, it was that Melanie Payne didn't back down. She regrouped. She schemed. She came back swinging. And as I sipped the last of my beer, staring up into the oak's cathedral canopy, I made a quiet vow when she did. I'd be ready. It happened 3 nights later, the kind of night where the sky seems determined to shake loose every secret it's been holding. By sundown, the wind had already picked up, making the oak's branches sway like old dancers keeping rhythm with the storm. I sat inside with the cameras open on my tablet rain, battering the windows, thunder rolling so deep it rattled the glasses in the cupboard. The oak, my oak, stood tall and steady. It had weathered storms for a century. This one would just be another entry in its long history. But across the street, Melanie Payne's yard told a different story. Her pine tree, tall but brittle, starved of care for at least 2 years, leaned ominously as the gusts tore at its limbs. I'd noticed before how the needles had browned, how bark peeled off like paper strips, neglected, ignored. A storm like this was going to test it, and I already knew how that test would end. Around 10 p.m. it happened. A crack so loud it cut through the roar of thunder, a splintering shriek of wood giving way. I rushed to the window and there it was, the pine collapsing in slow, terrible grace like a felled giant. It landed square on Melanie's roof, smashing. Shingles, splitting beams, collapsing part of her second story. The cameras caught the moment in sharp definition, raindrops glinting like sparks as the tree punched a jagged wound straight through her pristine white siding. The neighborhood woke. Lights flipped on doors. Open voices rose in disbelief. And in the middle of it all, Melanie herself came tearing into the street, drenched hair plastered across her face, pointing straight at my house. "You did this!" she screamed. Her voice cut through the storm almost as sharp as the lightning. "You sabotaged my tree. You poisoned it. You made this happen." I stepped out onto my porch, rain stinging my skin, and stared back at her. "Melanie, you've lost it. That pine's been dead for years. Everyone could see it coming." She advanced halfway across the street, finger jabbing like a weapon. "You wanted revenge. You made my tree fall." By then, the officers had arrived. Rodriguez and Chen again, pulling up with wipers, slapping furiously headlights, cutting the sheets of rain. They jumped out, hurried over, and immediately tried to calm Melanie down. "Ma'am, back away," Rodriguez ordered, holding a hand up. "This is an accident caused by the storm. Nothing criminal here," but she wasn't listening. She jabbed her finger toward me again. "Arrest him. He's been plotting against me. You saw the emails. You know he wants to destroy me." Chen shook her head, firm but calm. "Miss Payne, we have documentation on your pine tree. Multiple neighbors have reported its poor condition for over 2 years. This is weather damage, nothing more. Neighbors had gathered now raincoats thrown over pajamas, umbrellas, bending under the wind, and one by one they started speaking up. She never trimmed that tree. It's been dead since last spring. I told her to call an arborist last year." Their voices cut through Melanie's accusations, a chorus of reality against her delusion, and she hated it. I could see it in her eyes, the fury of someone who thrives on control, realizing the crowd no longer believes her. Finally, Rodriguez stepped in. "Miss Payne, this is not the boy's responsibility. You'll need to contact your insurance and the city inspector tomorrow morning. End of discussion. Melanie turned rain streaming down her face, and for a second, I thought she might lunge at me. But then she did something worse. She smiled. A slow, eerie smile that promised she wasn't finished. She stormed back into her house, slammed the door behind her, and the storm carried on. I stood there on the porch, soaked through heart-hammering, and let out a bitter laugh. The universe doesn't need my help to punish you, I muttered. The next morning, daylight revealed the damage in merciless clarity. Half of Melanie's roof was caved in, broken glass glittered across her driveway. Blue tarps flapped where emergency crews had tried to stabilize the mess. Neighbors walked past, shaking their heads, whispering. And of course, right on cue, another envelope showed up in my mailbox. This one was a handwritten incident report, accusing me of malicious negligence leading to property damage. She'd even underlined it 3 times, as if that gave it weight. I didn't even bother opening the whole thing. I took a photo, sent it to James Holloway and the board, and attached it to my growing file. Then I sent a copy to Thomas, my lawyer, who replied almost instantly. She just gave us Exhibit B. Keep it safe. By lunchtime, the police had returned not to question me, but to check on Melanie, who neighbors said was wandering the street, muttering about conspiracies and vendettas. She refused help, refused to talk, and slammed her door again. The oak stood, in my yard, calm and eternal, casting shade as if none of it mattered. And maybe to the oak it didn't, but to me it was clear. The storm hadn't just brought down a tree. It had brought Melanie closer to collapse, too. Her pine had fallen, her roof was broken, her lies were unraveling. Yet deep down, I knew she'd twist even this disaster into another excuse to attack. Because Melanie Payne wasn't just unlucky, she was relentless. And the storm that had toppled her tree had only set the stage for something bigger, darker, and more dangerous. The storm passed, but the fallout didn't. By the time the tarps on Melanie Payne's roof stopped flapping, the city inspectors had already scheduled a visit. Funny thing about emergency damage, it tends to invite a closer look. And when the inspectors showed up in their reflective vests and clipboards, they didn't just see a fallen pine tree. They saw the whole rotten picture. Peeling paint, cracked, siding, gutters clogged so thick with pine needles they sprouted moss. And that was just the exterior. From the sidewalk I watched them frown, shake their heads, scribble notes. Melanie trailed behind them like a furious shadow, trying to narrate away each violation. That's temporary. I've already scheduled repairs. Those cracks aren't structural. That moss is ornamental. The inspectors didn't buy a word. One of them snapped photos. Another measured the sag in her porch. When they were done, they left her with a bright orange notice taped to her door. Failure. To maintain property, multiple code violations, mandatory compliance within 60 days or face fines. It was deliciously ironic. Months earlier, Melanie had filed petitions with the city to tighten neighborhood standards, hoping to weaponize stricter codes against everyone else. She'd bragged about it at HOA meetings, waving paperwork like a battle flag. And now those very standards had circled back like a boomerang with her name etched on it. That evening, the neighborhood group chat lit up again. Screenshots of her violation notice circulated like wildfire. One neighbor quipped, "Guess she should have fined herself first." Another added, "Maybe she'll cite herself for unsafe vegetation hazard too." I stayed quiet, but inside I was grinning. The next day, Melanie doubled down. She called an emergency HOA inspection and delivered notices to half the block. People found slips in their mailboxes claiming everything from unauthorized lawn ornaments to non-compliant mailbox paint. She avenging the Millers for having an unapproved trampoline, though it had been there since before she moved in. But here's where she miscalculated. She filed the same notice against her own property. Apparently, she thought blanketing the entire neighborhood would make it look like she was fair and balanced. The problem, her own house really was out of compliance. And when city officials reviewed the paperwork, they realized she'd essentially confessed to her own violations in writing. It was self-sabotage at its finest. Like reporting your neighbor, for speeding while handing the cop your own unpaid tickets. Word spread fast. By evening, neighbors weren't just annoyed, they were laughing. She fined herself, someone posted. That's commitment. Another neighbor wrote, Does that mean she owes herself $250 a day? Hope she pays on time. Still, the humor didn't erase the tension. Melanie's behavior was unraveling and everyone could feel it. She stalked the sidewalks with her clipboard, jotting down phantom offenses, glaring at kids' bikes left on driveways, snapping photos of flower beds. It was like watching a dictator cling to power after the throne's already been carried off. I kept my cameras rolling, my files growing thicker. Each notice she slipped into a mailbox. Each photo she snapped of Myoac became another brick in the wall closing in on her. Then came the board meeting. James Holloway had called it after receiving dozens of complaints. Neighbors packed into the community center, folding chairs, squeaking murmurs, buzzing. Melanie arrived late, striding in as if the room owed her silence. She wore her usual pastel blouse and pearls, but the dark circles under her eyes betrayed the storm inside. When James opened the floor, the floodgates burst. One by one, neighbors recounted her harassment. The fake fines, the threats, the clipboard crusades. Even mild-mannered retirees who never raised their voices were shaking with indignation. Finally, James held up a copy of her latest stunt, the emergency inspection notices, including the one she'd filed against herself. "Miss Payne," he said, voice flat, "can you explain why you submitted fabricated citations under HOA authority when the board never approved them?" Melanie straightened, chin high. "Because this community is falling apart. Because no one else is willing to enforce standards. I am the only one willing to keep Brookstone Meadows respectable." Her voice rose with each word echoing off the low ceiling. But the room didn't respond with applause. Only silence. And silence is deadly when you expect cheers. James cleared his throat. "Let me be clear. You are not president. You were never president. You were chair of the landscaping committee. That role has been revoked. You have no authority to issue fines, notices, or citations of any kind. Do you understand?" The silence stretched. Melanie's face flushed crimson. Then, with a sharp huff, she stormed out, clipboard clutched like a life raft. The room exhaled. Neighbors traded glances, relief tempered with unease. We all knew what that meant. She wasn't finished. Melanie Payne wasn't the type to fold her tent and vanish. No, she'd come back harder. When I got home that night, I sat beneath the oak with my tablet scrolling through the footage of her pacing the sidewalks, scribbling on her clipboard. The tree swayed gently overhead, leaves whispering like conspirators. I thought about how storms don't always announce themselves with thunder. Sometimes they creep back at midnight carrying chainsaws. And sure enough, in the pit off my stomach, I knew the truth. Melanie was about to cross a line she couldn't uncross. I should have known it wouldn't. End with a board meeting. People like Melanie Payne don't take humiliation as a lesson. They take it as gasoline. By the time the next week rolled around, my gut was already warning me something was coming. The oak had stood for over a century, but Melanie had made it her personal vendetta. It was just after midnight when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I was half asleep on the couch, still in yesterday's flannel shirt. When I tapped the screen, the camera feed flickered into view, and there she was. Melanie Payne, dressed in dark sweatpants and a rain jacket. Her hair tied back in a messy bun, sneaking across my lawn like a burglar in a community theater play. And in her hands, a gas-powered chainsaw. I sat bolt upright, adrenaline, turning my veins into live wires. She yanked the starter cord, and the chainsaw snarled to life loud enough to wake the whole block. The oak shuddered as she pressed the blade into its trunk. Sawdust sprayed like sparks floating in the camera's infrared glow. I didn't hesitate. I dialed 911 with one hand and slipped on my boots with the other. "This is Ethan Boyd at 214 Brookstone," I said, voice clipped. "Urgent. She's back. She's on my property right now with a chainsaw. Send units immediately." Dispatch assured me officers were on their way. Meanwhile, I stepped out onto the porch phone and hand camera light flashing. "Melanie, drop it," I shouted over the roar. "You're on camera. The cops are coming." She didn't even flinch. Her eyes glowed wild in the lamplight as she leaned harder into the cut, teeth-bared chainsaw whining against the oak's thick trunk. "This tree is ominous," she screamed. "I'm saving the neighborhood." By then, neighbors were pouring out of their homes, drawn by Theracot. Robes flapping slippers, squatching on wet grass. They stood on the sidewalks in shock. A few raised their phones, recording. One kid shouted, "She's nuts!" and his mother yanked him back. I kept my distance. No way was it tangling with a spinning blade wielded by a woman unhinged. But I didn't need to. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder until red and blue lights bounced across the street. Two cruisers screeched to a stop, and out came Rodriguez and Chen, weapons holstered but hands firm on their belts. "Drop the saw, Miss Payne!" Rodriguez bellowed. She turned, eyes wide, face streaked with sweat, and shouted back, "You don't understand. I'm the president. I have the authority." Chen stepped forward, voice calm but sharp. "You are trespassing. You are committing felony property damage. Drop it now or we will take you down." For a moment, I thought she'd keep going. She was that far gone. But finally, with a frustrated wail, she let the saw clatter to the ground. Sparks hissed as the chain spun to a stop. Officers moved in, cuffing her as she kicked and cursed. The oak bore the wound. A deep, ugly gash cut halfway through its trunk. Raw wood exposed sap bleeding like amber tears. My heart sank as I realized what that meant. Sure enough, the next morning, the city arborist arrived to inspect. Dr. Marks, the same man who'd praised the oak's health weeks earlier, walked slowly around it, measuring, probing. His face was grave. "Ethan," he said finally, "I hate to tell you this. The structural integrity is compromised. With a cut this deep, the tree is unstable. It could collapse in a storm or even under its own weight. For safety reasons, the city will have to order its removal." It felt like a funeral notice. That tree had survived a century of storms, but it couldn't survive Melanie Payne's madness. When the crew came to take it down, half the neighborhood showed up to watch. Some stood silent, hands in pockets, heads bowed. Others muttered angry words about Melanie. I filmed the whole thing, not out of voyeurism, but out of duty, evidence, closure. Later, Thomas, my lawyer, called with news. "She's in deep this time. Trespass, criminal mischief, felony, vandalism, reckless endangerment. And with your footage, the neighbors' videos, the officer's testimony, there's no wiggle room." I sat on my porch watching the crew grind Theoak into logs and felt the irony sting. "So, she got what she wanted," I said bitterly. "The tree's gone." "Not exactly," Thomas said. "She didn't get it removed. She got it destroyed. There's a difference. And the law knows the difference. She'll pay, Ethan. One way or another, she'll pay." When night fell again, my yard looked naked without the oak. Just an empty patch of churned earth where roots once clung deep. But I wasn't alone. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles, beers, and kind words. Mrs. Miller from next door put a hand on my shoulder and said she thought she could take something from you. But all she did was take from herself. And she was right. Melanie Payne had crossed a line she could never uncross. The oak may have fallen, but her downfall was only just beginning. When the last branch of the oak was carted away, the silence in my yard felt wrong, like a missing tooth you can't stop tonguing. The ground was scarred, raw dirt and splinters where shade and history used to be. But the emptiness didn't last long because the legal storm was only beginning. And this time it wasn't me in the hot seat. It was Melanie Payne. Her arrest had already made the local news. A photo of her being led away in handcuffs, hair, wild face twisted in fury, ran under the headline, "HOA President Arrested in Midnight Chainsaw Rampage." Never mind that she wasn't even president. The press loved the title. The irony was delicious. And for once, the public weighs on my side. Comments online skewered her care and energy level 100. Imagine losing your mind over a tree. Meanwhile, Thomas, my lawyer, kept me updated. "The DA is treating this as a felony," he said, his voice calm but edged with satisfaction. "Multiple counts, criminal trespass, felony property damage, reckless endangerment, and given her history with those fake notices. We've got a pattern of harassment that strengthens the case." I asked the question that gnawed at me. But what if she tries to spin it, claim she was protecting the community or that she had authority? Thomas chuckled. "Ethan, you've got her on camera inventing bylaws. You've got the board's official statements, the arborist reports, the police warnings. Her defense is a house of cards in a hurricane. This isn't going away for her." Sure enough, the HOA board met again, this time without Melanie. The community center was packed. James Holloway stood at the front solemn and read a prepared statement. Effective immediately, Melanie Payne is barred from holding any HOA committee or leadership role. She is further prohibited from issuing communications on behalf of Brookstone Meadows. The board will cooperate fully with law enforcement in her prosecution. The room erupted not in chaos, but in applause. Neighbors clapped, some cheered, others just sighed in relief. For years, Melanie had been the self-appointed dictator of hydrangeas and hedge heights. Now she was dethroned, humiliated, and facing real consequences. But the victory wasn't mine alone. Something shifted in the neighborhood. People who used to keep their heads down started speaking up. The Millers offered to help me with replanting. The Johnsons organized a neighborhood watch group. Even old Mr. Carter, who rarely left his porch swing, came over with a thermos of coffee and said, "Guess we all needed our reminder that tyrants only rule if we let them." It felt good. Strange, but good. For the first time in years, Brookstone Meadows felt less like a prison of rules and more like a community. Insurance came through too. They covered the cost of removing the oak, reimbursed me for its appraised value, and even approved funds for planting. It didn't bring back the century-old tree, but it softened the blow. As for Melanie, her downfall deepened. Court dates were set. Reporters staked out her driveway, snapping photos of her scowling under a hoodie as she fetched her mail. One article detailed how the city had fined her property for multiple code violations. Ironically, the very standards she had lobbed for. I won't pretend I didn't savor the irony. She'd tried to bury me in paperwork and fines only to dig her own grave. But justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about closure. And the day Melanie stood in front of a judge trembling in her pastel blazer was the day closure finally came. I sat in the back of the courtroom watching as the DA laid out the evidence, the videos, the notices, the arborist's report. Officer Rodriguez testified about the warnings she'd ignored. Chen described the arrest, the midnight chainsaw still humming when they arrived. The judge listened, lips pressed tight, expression unimpressed. Melanie tried to defend herself, of course. "I was protecting the community," she said, voice cracking. "That tree was dangerous. The HOA bylaws." The judge cut her off. "Miss Payne, those bylaws do not exist. Your actions were unauthorized, unlawful, and reckless. You endangered yourself, your neighbors, and destroyed property of significant historical and monetary value. This court is not in the business of indulging fantasies of authority." Hearing that, seeing Melanie's face collapse under the weight of truth, was more satisfying than I expected. Not because I wanted her ruined, but because I wanted the madness to end. The sentence came down: restitution for damages, mandatory community service, mental health counseling, probation, and most striking, she was barred from holding any position of authority in the neighborhood ever again. Later, Thomas leaned over to me in the hallway. "She'll also have to sell. Too much debt now. Too many fines. She won't stay here much longer." I walked out of that courthouse lighter than I'd felt in months. The oak was gone, but so was her shadow. That evening, the neighborhood gathered in my yard. We grilled burgers. Kids played tag where the tree once stood. And for the first time in a long while, people laughed without glancing nervously at the sidewalk. Someone raised a toast to Ethan for standing up, but I corrected them. "To the oak," I said. "Because if it weren't for that tree, we might never have stood together." Glasses clinked. Laughter rang. And in that moment, the hole in my yard felt less like a loss and more like a beginning. Melanie Payne thought she'd destroy me by cutting down my oak. Instead, she destroyed herself. And in her absence, something stronger began to take root. Not just in my yard, but in the whole community. The morning after the courthouse verdict, I stepped into my backyard and felt a strange kind of quiet. For the first time in months, there was no dread humming in my chest. No fear of finding Melanie Payne lurking with her clipboard or a chainsaw. The oak was gone, yes, but the emptiness no longer felt like defeat. It felt like a foundation. That week, my neighbors rallied. The Johnson kids painted a sign that read, "This yard is ours too," in bright crayon colors. The miller showed up with gardening gloves and bags of soil. Even Mr. Carter, who hadn't lifted a tool since the Reagan administration, brought his old shovel. Together, we planted a new sapling, a young oak about 15 years old, donated by a historical tree foundation. When the roots settled into the earth, someone suggested we add a plaque. So we did. A small bronze plate set in stone right by the trunk. It read, "The Boyd Oak," a symbol of community strength, destroyed by one, replaced by many. That dedication day felt like a festival. Neighbors brought casseroles, grills smoked. Kids ran circles around the new tree. Someone joked it was a tree warming party and the name stuck. For once, laughter rang louder than gossip in Brookstone Meadows. I stood off to the side, watching it all unfold. People who used to avoid each other now swapped recipes and stories. Folks who once whispered about HOA politics now laughed openly about Melanie's fake bylaws. My yard, once the battleground, had become the gathering place. Of course, not everyone was in a party mood. Across the street, Melanie's house sat dark and silent. For all sign crooked in the lawn. She was gone, forced out by debt fines and humiliation. The storm had claimed her throne, and now she was just a bitter memory. Still, her shadow lingered. A few neighbors confessed they feared another Melanie might rise one day. A new tyrant with a clipboard and a taste for control. I smiled and pointed to the oak sapling. "That's why we planted this. It's not just a tree. It's a reminder. One person tried to tear us down, but together we grew back stronger." As weeks passed, the neighborhood settled into a rhythm it hadn't known in years. Kids played basketball without violation notices taped to their hoop. Gardeners planted whatever flowers they pleased. The HOA, under James Holloway's steady leadership, returned to what it was supposed to be, a board that maintained the pool schedule and organized summer barbecues, not a weapon for personal vendettas. Insurance checks arrived, covering part of the replanting and even paying for new landscaping around the sapling. With the extra funds, we added benches beneath the young oak, turning the spot into a little parklet. People came to sit to talk to share coffee in the mornings. The oak wasn't fully grown yet, but already it was bringing us together. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sapling in gold, Mrs. Miller asked me if I regretted any of it. The fights, the stress, the endless nights of paperwork. I thought about it. About the sleepless nights, the fear of hearing that chainsaw roar again, the heartbreak of watching my century-old oak fall. Regret, I said, shaking my head. No, Melanie thought she destroyed me. But all she did was prove how much we needed each other. This community was asleep. That tree woke us up. The lesson was simple, but sharp tyrants only win when people stay quiet. And sometimes it takes a storm or a chainsaw to remind everyone where the real power lies. I ended the evening under the new oak beer and had neighbors chatting around me. The sapling swayed in the breeze, small but determined. Its roots were finding the soil gripping deeper each day. And I realized something. Melanie Payne had destroyed a tree, but she had planted something she never intended. A community that wouldn't be bullied again. The oak would grow. We would grow with it. And the next time anyone tried to swing a chainsaw through our peace, they wouldn't just face me, they'd face all of us. If there's one thing this whole ordeal taught me, it's that strength doesn't come from standing alone. For months, I thought it was me against Melanie Payne. One homeowner versus the iron fist of a clipboard tyrant. But I was wrong. The real turning point wasn't when I called the police, or when the board stripped her of her title, or even when the judge handed down her sentence. It was when my neighbors finally said enough. Community isn't built in meetings or bylaws. It's built in moments when one person speaks up and another nods in agreement, and suddenly the silence breaks. The oak tree was just a tree, yes, but it became a symbol of what happens when people refuse to bow down. Even after it was cut, its roots gave us something to rally around. Life will always bring us people like Melanie, loud, arrogant, convinced their power is bigger than at Island. But life will also bring us oaks, symbols of patience, strength, and resilience. When the oaks fall, it's our job to plant new ones, stronger ones together. So if you take anything from me story, let it be this. Don't let bullies define your community. Stand tall, grow roots, and remember, no chainsaw can cut down what we build together. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a Melon Payne in your life? Someone who tried to control or intimidate you? Drop your story in the comments and let's remind each other that bullies only win if we let them. And if you enjoyed this saga, hit that subscribe button because there are more HOA stories where this came.